Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Elizabeth and I run the blog lifefromtheviolasection.com, where I share my favorite practice tips, general advice, and tech for musicians. My cat Pacho is back. I think just anytime I sit in this chair, he gets super interested because I don't sit here very often. I've shared a couple practice vlogs here on my YouTube and on my blog where I do a bit of score study, and I recently realized that not everyone knows exactly what that is or how to actually do score study. So today we're going to focus on exactly that, my best tips and tricks to start doing score study when you're learning a new piece of music. So if you don't already know, score study is a way of practicing where you read through the sheet music or the score and you learn a lot about the piece that way. So we can look at the music itself, we can learn about the composer and the time period that the piece was written in, we can learn about how our part fits in with everyone else's if it's an ensemble piece, and we can really listen and just get a sense of what this piece entails, and it's a great way to practice without your instrument. When you do score study, it can be very helpful to annotate and write things in. If you're on an iPad and you're using Forscore, I like to add a new layer and do all of my score study annotating on that layer so that then I can hide it when I go back and practice the music so that those annotations aren't there distracting me, but I still have access to them. If you're using paper sheet music, you can always get some fun kind of stationary things. So here are a few annotation tools that I use. I usually just use these when I read books, but they're also great for sheet music. So the first helpful thing that I have are these transparent or kind of translucent sticky notes. So you can see through them, you peel it, it's just a sticky note, you peel it off, you put it on the page, and then you can write on top of this, so that you can still see what's underneath, but you're not actually writing straight on the page. This is great for any time where you want to write in something, but you don't want it to be permanent. Even if it is pencil, you know, sometimes if you're reading a book, like the indent's gonna stay there on the page. So these are really, really great for that. Next, I love these little highlighting sticky notes. So these are mostly sticky. So this is the only part of the whole thing that is not sticky. But you peel it off, and I like to stick it on like a line of a paragraph or a couple of lines in a book where I really just want to highlight the text. This could be really handy if you're looking at like a big orchestral score and the melody is moving around. You could always highlight the melody line where that pops in. But anytime you want to highlight something, if it's kind of thin, this is a great option. And then of course we just have regular sticky note tabs and just, you know, typical sticky notes. This can be really helpful if you're looking at a multi-movement piece and you want to literally keep tabs on where each movement is so that you can easily just flip to it, or just anything of note that you really want to stick out, want to be able to get to it quickly. I also have lots of fun sticky notes. I have lots of cat sticky notes, floral sticky notes, things like that. You can always use those too if you have things similar to that, but I think that these are really, really handy, especially for sheet music, so that you can still see what's underneath, but you can write any notes that you might have. Okay, today we're going to go through kind of an order that you can do score study in with the piece Romance for Viola and Orchestra by Max Bruch. This is the Urtext edition, and I believe it's just piano reduction. So let's just dive into kind of an order that you might want to do score study in. So first, of course, you want to get the sheet music, whether that's a physical copy or a PDF. And if you have a PDF, if you want to open it on a tablet or on a computer program where you can annotate it in some way, that can be very helpful. So we'll open it up. I just have my solo parts in here. I have so many different versions of this, and they're just all inside there. So there is a preface in here. It tells you what key it's in, when it was written, and a little bit of the background of this piece. It's very helpful to read that, and we'll get to that a little bit later. We'll get to the historical research a little later. So for now, if it's your first time looking at the music, you know, if you've chosen to learn a piece, you might have already heard it before, whether it was live and it inspired you or if it was a recording, you might already know some things about it. But when you first get the sheet music, it can be helpful to just kind of get the basic details, who the composer is, when it was written, the time period that it was written in, key and time signatures, and just kind of your general sight reading checklist. So the key signature, any rhythms that pop up, just general basics like that can be a helpful first thing to look at when you're doing score study. Next, we might want to take a look at kind of the general structure of the music. This one is just a short piece. It's just one movement, so can't really do much there, but if you're looking at maybe a symphony or concerto, there are probably going to be a couple movements, 3 or 4 movements. You can look at each movement and see what form those movements in, if they're in sonata allegro form or if they're in a rondo form, things like that. That can help you just learn the overall structure of the music. How many movements are there, of course, any key changes that pop up. Those are helpful things to look for. So we can kind of scan through this. It's only one movement, but we can see if the melody returns anywhere, if the melody comes up in any other parts. We can look for key changes. Looks like there's a key change right here. So that's kind of a structural change as well. After you've identified a bit of the structure, the form, all those kinds of things, we can go a little bit more in depth. Like, what is the melody? Does it ever come back? Does it modulate? Are there rhythmic patterns? How does your part relate to the other parts that are written? What are the textures? What's the overall mood? Does the mood change? More in-depth things like that. So in this piece, we start out right away with the main melody. So we can look at that and see, does this come back anywhere? Looks like it comes back on page 6 at G. So that's probably a big moment. The piano is pianissimo. Not sure what dynamic the viola is. There's a piano and then a crescendo right before it. That's the only marking that we have though. I know looking at something like this can seem very, very overwhelming at first, and it does feel kind of overwhelming for me after it's been a while since I've done any score study in a piece as in-depth with such a thick texture as this one. The nice thing about this score, it has different instrument name labels so that you know a little bit of what's going on, even though it's a piano reduction. One thing that can really help if you're feeling overwhelmed is to look through it while listening to a recording, and that's my favorite way to do score study. So we start at the beginning, put on any recording of it, hopefully like a professional one that's high quality. It can be hard with newer pieces of music and less famous ones because sometimes there is no real professional recording, and sometimes it's just students at recitals, and while it's great to post those on the internet, sometimes the rhythms are wrong or different dynamics aren't totally right. So just take your listening with a grain of salt, know who's performing it, maybe a little bit about their background, and then you can determine, is this a super high quality recording? Do I want to do my score study with this, or should I dive a little bit deeper and see if there are any other recordings available? So for me, when I do score study, I pretty much always put on a recording of the piece. This helps keep me from getting distracted and lost in the music because, you know, it's so easy when you're just looking at this to just kind of glaze over and zone out because there's so much going on. It's hard to kind of just imagine all of this in your head. Unless like you already really know what it sounds like, then you can kind of hear it in your head. But also by listening to a recording, you can also hear how it's kind of typically performed, if there are any stylistic things that everyone seems to do when they play this, and you can hear how some performers might play the same piece in different ways. It can be very, very helpful information. So going back to things to look for in your score study, next let's talk about dynamics and articulations. So all composers have a different way of writing dynamics and articulations. Some composers tell you exactly what they want everywhere. I think Schoenberg is a really good example of this, writing in all these dynamic changes and like a different articulation over every single note so that when you perform it, it's precise and it's exactly what he intended. Other composers are a lot more vague and they'll write a dynamic, they might write a crescendo, couple staccatos, and then it's up to you to create the rest of the sound. And it's a little bit more up for interpretation, which can be very, very nice and very freeing as an artist. And sometimes we don't feel like doing that and it's easier to have all of those articulation markings. But either way, get to know the composer's writing style in terms of articulations. If they write a lot of things, if it's very minimal, and just see kind of what the overall dynamic structure is. If it's a very quiet piece or if it's very loud and bold, think of some adjectives that might describe this piece. Any kind of characteristics and moods. If any words pop into your head, it can be really helpful to get one of those translucent sticky notes, put it down and write the word that you're thinking of in this section, because A lot of times when you're performing, if you have that mood or that word in your head, it just helps free you up and it helps you really get that mood across. I don't really know how it works, but it does. So take a look at dynamics, articulation, get an overview, and see what the other parts are doing. If they get super loud while you're quiet, or if they're very, very quiet and you're kind of drowning them out. It's good to know how your part fits in with others, and that's a big aspect of score study. This next facet of score study is very important if you're looking at a chamber music piece, an ensemble piece, an orchestral piece, anything with multiple musicians in it, is to look at the orchestration. So look at the accompaniment, look at the other parts. If it's an ensemble piece, see what those other parts are doing. See if the instruments are ever grouped together in similar ways. Like, do violin 1 and violin 2 always have similar rhythms at the same time? Does the bassoon and viola have a lot of back and forth or a lot of the same thing? It can be helpful to find these groups. And then if you're playing in a big orchestra, especially if you're doing a gig and you don't have much practice time and you're just kind of looking at an overview, it's really helpful to know, okay, I'm going to be with this person there, so I'm going to really tune in and listen to that person. It can really, really help prepare you very quickly. With the orchestration, you can also see if the melody appears in one instrument and then later comes in another instrument. If it changes between those two, different relationships like that, you can get to intimately know a piece without all of the practice time spent actually really working on it, or all of the rehearsal time where you might notice those things by hearing them around you. Last, let's talk about historical research. So some scores have a little bit of background knowledge at the beginning. I love scores like these. Being able to read these program notes, basically program notes, before playing is very, very helpful, and it usually has an author's name and a date. Very, very good. If there's nothing written about the piece, first look up the composer if you don't know anything about them. Find out when they lived or do live during. Find out where they're from, what kind of styles of music that they write. Look into the piece itself. Is this a typical kind of piece for that composer to write, or is this very out of the norm for them? Also take a listen to the other works that they've created. A lot of composers, I don't want to say that they do one thing really well, but they do one thing and they kind of apply it to the rest of their music. Like Mozart was great at writing operas, and a lot of his music sounds very lyrical and very operatic. Tchaikovsky wrote a lot of ballets, and a lot of his music has that like light kind of dancey feel to it. So see what these composers typically write, what their style is, and kind of what their tendencies are. That can really, really give you an edge as you start to learn any piece. So I know score study can feel a little bit overwhelming, and I honestly feel a little overwhelmed after looking at just all of these notes right now with nothing playing. So if you're new to score study, I highly recommend just putting on a recording of the piece and flipping through the score, just following along. Kind of like if you read a book while listening to an audiobook. It's like having it read to you, but you're also following along. Try that first. Just see what you notice, and as you do more and more of it, you kind of know what to look for. You know what you want to find out, and you know how to mark it in a way that will help you later on. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope that my tips on score study are helpful for you. If you do your score study in a different way from what I mentioned today, please let us know down in the comments so that you can help other people. I know everyone has a different way of practicing and studying, so my tips might not work for everyone, but yours might help someone else. So please share down below. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing. I post new videos basically every other Sunday at noon Eastern Time. Thanks for watching.